Okay. Okay. So on behalf of Adult Education, I'd like to welcome everybody to this wonderful program being hosted by Lois Miller. My dearest thanks to Lois for doing this for us, and I know that Mark worked with her to set up the program. So Mark, you know, the technology part of it. Mark will be driving for most of it. And at the end of the presentation, Lois will take questions. So
Sure.
I turn it over to Lois and Mark.
Thank you, Rhonda.
So
You want to say something
I'm going to
first?
share the screen so I could put up the slides, and then Lois will tell me when to go to the next one and so forth. And
Yeah,
I will,
we'll get through this.
yeah, and I will ask people to please mute their microphone if they're not talking this way. If you get extraneous noise in the background, the rest of us won't hear it. So, so please mute your microphone. Okay, so let me share screen. And okay, Lois.
Okay, so here we go. First,
go into
once again,
slideshow.
Sorry. We ready?
Yeah, now we are.
Okay. So first, I want to thank Anne for inviting me to do this, because as most of you know, I was a guide at the Museum of Art, Philadelphia Museum, for 33 years. And I retired when I moved down to Florida. It'll be 3 years in June, and I miss it a great deal. So this was really a labor of love for me. And Mark, I couldn't have done it without you, because there was no way I would be able to get these images up on a screen. So thank you too. So as you see, we're going to do Frank Gehry and an Israeli sculptor, Nirit Levav-Packer. And as it says, the title, Jewish artists from around the world. And you may be wondering, well, why Frank Gehry? Well, a little known fact, most of us didn't know. I mean, I didn't know until Anne Darnancourt, our late director at the museum, took him on to do the museum renovation, and people started doing research on him, that he's Jewish. And hence I decided, okay, he would be perfect, because he's probably one of the greatest architects of our time. And his buildings are really amazing. So with that said, normally when I would do an exhibition at the museum, a Jewish artist type tour, not an exhibition, but Jewish artist tour, I start with a quote by a famous person. And I'll just give you a little clue. Most of us have read this famous author when we were probably in junior high school, middle school, and he's somewhat verbose. So it's going to be a little long, but I think it's really interesting, you know, what he wrote about the Jews. And I'm going to quote, "If statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous dim puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his commercial importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all the ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other people have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now or have vanished. The Jews saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his mortality?" Anybody have any idea who might have written this? Again, an author you guys read in school.
Mark Twain.
You got it, Mark Twain. So I thought that that was really kind of interesting to quote Mark Twain to start off. So now we're going to talk a lot about Frank Gehry. Again, he was really fascinating to learn about, and I think you're going to really enjoy the images. So Frank Gehry is actually still alive and well. He's working on our multi-year plan at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. As you probably remember, the first part of it was unveiled, what we call the core project was unveiled last spring. But he still has his firm in California, and at 93, he's still going strong. But to give you some of his background, Frank Gehry was born Frank Goldberg on February 28th, 1929 in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. He and his sister Doreen were raised in Timmins, which is a small mining town in eastern Ontario, by the extended Goldberg family. His father, Irving, was a former boxer who traveled selling pinball and slot machines. Sometimes Frank would make sales calls with his father, which meant that he made frequent stops at bars at a very young age. And in a Smithsonian magazine profile, he was quick to point out, but my mother took me to concerts and introduced me to art. And so there was a balance. Gehry also considered his grandmother to be an early influence. He fondly remembers building imaginary cities with her using wood shavings scavenged from his grandfather's hardware store. He also remembers the carp, and we'll see that a little later. He also remembers the carp that his grandmother let swim around in the family bathtub. In later years, Gehry regularly used fish motifs in many of his designs. And as he told a writer at time, he said, "I never intended to build fish. In my mind, I say, enough with the fish, but it has a life of its own." And then by the mid-40s, his family was experiencing hardships on several fronts. Following the Second World War, the Canadian government began cracking down on gambling, and his father's business suffered. At the same time, the family lost most of their savings as a result of some bad investments. Then in 1947, Goldberg, as we called him back then, suffered a heart attack, or I'm sorry, Goldberg, the father, suffered a heart attack, which was severe enough that his doctor suggested a change of scenery. And as a result, family left Canada and moved to LA, to California. And Frank Gehry had just graduated from high school, and the move proved to be a very important one. He has lived the rest of his life in California, and critics consider him to be very much a California designer, as they have called him bold, brash, and unpretentious. He took a job as a truck driver in order to pay for night school art classes, and eventually enrolled in the School of Architecture at USC. He was inspired to get a degree in architecture by one of his teachers, who invited him to visit a construction site. And as he said, "I was quite moved by watching the architect walking around, supervising the things he was worried about." In 1952, he married his first wife, a stenographer, Anita Snyder, who put him through school. The two were married for 16 years and had 2 daughters. And according to Gehry, his wife encouraged him to change his name. He had been taunted and beaten up when he was a boy in Toronto because he was Jewish, and his wife feared the same for their children. He now says he regrets his decision. He says, "I wouldn't do it today." After graduating from USC in 1954, he had a 1-year stint in the Army, Special Services Division. And it was during that time that he began experimenting with furniture design, since his assignment was to make furniture for the enlisted soldiers. But his designs were so good that a lot of his tables and chairs usually ended up in the officers' quarters. He then spent a year studying city planning at Harvard Graduate School of Design. And in 1957, he returned to California and worked for several established architecture firms before opening his own firm in 1962. His early projects were fairly typical of the times and followed the modernist style, which stressed clean geometric lines, no clutter, no decoration. Simplicity was key, functionality was the focus. But Gehry, the artist, however, was itching to experiment. And he began using materials, and we're going to see that in a few moments. He began using materials such as unpainted plywood, rough concrete, corrugated metal, all of which are usually hidden after a house is properly finished. As Gehry said in an interview, I was trying to humanize stuff. In 72, he had his first flirtation with celebrity, not for his architecture, but for a line of furniture that he made out of corrugated cardboard. Again, he was experimenting with traditional functions of materials, since cardboard was not usually considered in furniture design. And this was called easy edges. The chairs and tables were lightweight, inexpensive, and fun, but he decided to pull the plug on this because he said he didn't want to be tied down making mass-produced furniture. And in the late 70s, he introduced something called experimental edges, a more upscale version of the former. And he said the reason he dabbles, someone said, according to Gehry, the reason he dabbles in furniture and other small projects is because I get a quick fix. Architecture takes so long. That's why you do the small stuff, instant gratification. Okay, so Gehry undertook had a stream of steady business during this period, designing private homes, small public businesses, mostly in California. And it was the renovation of his own home in Santa Monica, however, that brought him back into the spotlight. So Mark, if we can show the first round, couple slides of his house, everybody will get to see what they look like. Okay, so here we're looking at this 1920s bungalow, and it was actually a pink bungalow, and you can kind of still see some of the pink in certain areas. And his wife, Anita, had found it, and she got it at a really good price. And it's been described as, one art critic described it as an unfinished looking structure from a new wave Oz. Gehry left the pink exterior of his home intact, but he encased it in a shell made from metal, chain link fencing, and glass. As he explained to Smithsonian, his intention was to build a new house around the old and try to maintain a tension between the two by having the one define the other. But the bizarre structure caused quite a tension between Gehry and his neighbors, who threatened him to take him to court because they considered it an eyesore. And as we look at the first two, we can see, especially in the second one, you can kind of see the corrugated metal and the glass, and you're going to see a lot more of the glass and what he did with windows in odd shapes and odd places. So let's move on to the second two. Okay, so now you're getting more of a picture. You can kind of see again in the background the original pink and what he is building around it. So his street became a mecca for architecture students who came from all over the world to see the elaborate pink concoction. He also received a lot of national attention, although a lot of it was not positive. Many of his corporate clients were turned off by this building, and several pulled their contract. His large-scale business may have suffered, but private clients who commissioned Gehry to renovate studios and homes were more than happy to work with this innovative architect who coined the term cheapskate to describe his style of working with inexpensive man-made materials. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few more details about the house itself that I found actually on a site from the Museum of Contemporary Art. So if we go to the next two slide images. Okay, so now you're seeing some of the interior. So as I read this, you'll understand what he's doing kind of with the windows and, the bare, you're seeing the beams, you're seeing things, as they said, that normally in a finished house, no one would see. Okay, so he says, I became fascinated with creating a shell that would define the house by showing parts of the old in an edited fashion. I began to engage the house in a dialogue by cutting away from it, exposing some parts and covering up others. He wrapped the house in layers of unfinished frugal materials, which I mentioned were corrugated metal, chain link, and this also allowed him to tap into his fascination with everyday materials that had begun when he was a child, when he spent time in his grandfather's hardware store. And of course, these types of materials were considered ugly industrial fixtures in the LA landscape. And inspired by contemporary culture, he embraced the challenge of proving that art could be made out of anything, even out of chain link. So you'll notice some of the windows in the left, which is the kitchen, and the right is the master bedroom. And what he did to open the interior space, he poked glass structures through the exterior of the original house. As a result, a large glass cube appeared lodged between the old and new fabric of the house, flooding the kitchen with light and framing views of the sky and trees above. And you can see that right there. Such intruding fragments evoked the disoriented angles of cubism. And Gehry said, "We were told there were ghosts in the house. I decided they were ghosts of cubism. The windows, I wanted to make them look like they were crawling out of this thing. At night, because this glass is tipped, it mirrors the light in. So when you're sitting at the table, you see all these cars going by, you see the moon in the wrong place. The moon is, in one place, but it reflects in another place. And you think it's up there and you don't know where the hell you are." He also, when talking about the house, he also referenced the sense of movement in like Marcel Duchamp's New Descending Staircase, which I'm sure all of us have seen at one point or another, and the unfinished quality of abstract expressionist artist Jackson Pollock's paintings, which Gehry says look as though the paint was just applied. The resulting modest and casual appearance makes the house appear thrown together, an effect that required a great deal of work and planning. So again, just like we have people today who are talking about our museum, and some people love the interior, some people don't. Same thing with this. And the house became Gehry's laboratory and his showroom, drawing both praise and derision. Neighbors were shocked and angry. One tried to sue him, another attempted to have him arrested. There were protests and poor reviews from the press. One critic even took to walking his dog in Gehry's yard, encouraging it to defecate there in protest. Okay, so Mark, do we have a couple more of the Gehry house? Or is that it? What's next?
Yeah, I think that was it. I think that.
Okay, so yeah, we could, okay. Because I'm gonna move on to, we can actually put up the next ones so you can see what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Okay, so here we have the Fish Dance Restaurant and the fish in front. And this is in Kobe, Japan. And exhilarated by his newfound freedom, Gehry decided that the edge was where he wanted to be. And he started over from scratch. He reduced his office staff from 30 to 3 and resolved to take on work that he truly wanted to do. And this led to one of the buildings we're looking, or actually the piece of sculpture that we're looking at in front of the Fish Dance Restaurant. And this was completed in 1986 in Kobe, Japan. And a little bit of background. In the 70s and the 80s, a number of leading architects began to add historical ornament and decoration to their work as part of a general backlash, which came to be known as postmodernism, against the clean lines and kind of like what they considered stifling purity of the high modernist architect. And Gehry felt, as he explained in some interviews, that he found the use of what he called kitschy ornamentation, he didn't like it. And in certain cases, even damaging to the idea of progress in architecture. He became fixated on finding ways to incorporate a sense of movement and emotion in his work, to add some humanism to the coldness and inertness of modernism, without resorting to direct quotation from the past. As part of that, he began to sketch various kinds of fish, to design fish lamps. Adding the fish to his formal repertoire also marked the beginning, and we're going to see a lot of this later, of his exploration of curved surfaces. Figuring out how to construct the fish in 3 dimensions made it easier later on to develop the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, and the Walt Disney Concert Hall. They're like direct descendants of this fish that we're looking at right now. So this fish in front of the Fish Dance Restaurant, he used chain link mesh covered with copper sheets resembling scales to create the 72-foot tall public art. Okay, and this is actually at the entrance to a park in Kobe. So that is the Fish Dance Restaurant. And let's move on to the next slides. And Karina, I don't know if you were lucky enough to see this. I didn't even know many years ago when Bill and I were in Prague, I didn't even know this was there, because this was built in the late 90s and early 2000s, and something like this had never been done before, dancing house. And if I ever get back there, I think it would be fantastic to see it. And Mark put up a lot of great images of it. So the dancing house is the name given to what we call the Nationaal Nederlander building, which is located in Prague, Czech Republic, and it was nicknamed the Fred and Ginger. Actually, Frank Gehry kind of started the nickname after, of course, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. The structural design is quite unique and different from his other designs. The architecture of the building is designed as such that the structure resembles a pair of dancers. It was constructed between 92 and 96, and Gehry was able to create a building which no one had ever seen before. The original building on this property had been originally built in 1922, and it was destroyed during an air bombing on Prague in February of 1945. And after the destruction of the whole site, then the Netherlands Insurance Company purchased it, and Gehry and a famous architect, Vlado Milanuk, was approached, and the two collaborated, I should say, on this. So the building is viewed as a couple dancing, where the male part of a dancing couple is represented by rock, which symbolizes power and strength, where the other female counterpart is symbolized as a tower of glass, represented the more fragile and soft. And in the year 1996, this building won the category of Best Design from American Time magazine. Okay, and the design was, again, as I say, was non-traditional and controversial because it kind of really stands out in contrast to the typical Baroque, Gothic, Art Nouveau architecture that Prague is known for. You know, it doesn't go along with the other styles. But at this time, probably one of the most beloved presidents in the Republic was Václav Havel. And he really put his whole, all his might behind it, because he wanted the building to become a center of cultural activity for tourists. And let's go on and look at some of the other ones so people can get a sense. Okay, so here you can see how it's right on the river during the daylight. And then let's go to the next ones, because I think we have some with the lights at night, which are really beautiful too. So due to the unusual shape and design, this style is called Deconstructivist Architecture. And there are 99 concrete panels with different shapes. There's also, on the male part of the building, there's also a sculpture of Medusa, which looks like a twisted structure of metal on the top of the building. And the tower of glass is actually close to half the height of the building and is supported by curved pillars, okay, where you see that the second building has the more kind of concrete pillars that follow the river. Okay, for 10 years, due to its unusual shape, design, and structure, it was, again, just like Frank's original home in Santa Monica, which, by the way, he still owns, but this was a topic of debate for the people of Prague. And in 2005, Czech National Bank finally issued a gold coin as with a motif of Dancing House on it, giving it its name, 10 centuries of modern architecture. And then go to the next slides, please, Mark, because we'll see what's going on in parts of the building. So there are rooms, so you can stay there, and you're looking right now, you're looking at the Ginger Suite, and you kind of see those kind of curved windows. And then if we go to the next slide, you're going to see views of the restaurant. So you kind of see the lobby area of the restaurant and the restaurant itself. So that is Dancing House. Okay, so in 1987, Gehry was honored with a retrospective of his work by the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And by the late 80s, critics were recognizing him as more than just an eccentric California architect. As one art critic wrote, architecture critic, he may no longer be written off as an idiosyncratic California bad boy. He must be regarded as one of the 2 or 3 most important members of the late modernist generation, and maybe the most successful innovator of them all. And in 1989, he was awarded the most prestigious award you could get in architecture, the Pritzker Architecture Prize. And in the late 80s, Gehry started turning to technology to solve some of his elaborate design problems. Although he began by physically creating 3-dimensional models, sometimes using crumpled paper and soda bottles for the very early ones, computers were necessary to plot out the complicated design specs. And his computer program was adapted from software used in the manufacture of Boeing jets. A decade later, it proved key in designing what Gehry's, probably his most famous building up until this time, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. So let's go into that. So here we have the Guggenheim. With its swooping titanium arches and jutting wings, it looks like something poised to take flight. Master architect Philip Johnson was quoted as saying, "It is the most important building of our time." And the public was also intrigued by his modern marvel, and it opened in 1997 and drew more than 1 million visitors its first year. Okay, and so I'm going to read you a little bit more in depth about it. And if we can go to the next slide, I think we have one in the evening. Yeah, that's our next one, so you can see what it looks like at night. Okay, so as I said, it opened in 97. And in 1990, when the plans began, Bilbao, which was a 700-year-old port city in northern Spain, was struggling with widespread unemployment resulting from the decline of shipbuilding and heavy industry. The museum was conceived as part of an economic redevelopment plan for the area, and Gehry was charged with creating an expansive museum that simultaneously harmonized with the surrounding 19th century architecture and created an iconic new face for the city. He began by choosing a waterfront site that would both honor the city's shipbuilding and port city and connect Bilbao with the river that had sustained it for so many centuries. Gehry knew that he wanted a metal exterior that would respond to the changing light conditions of Bilbao. It often rains there, and he needed a material that was leak-proof and didn't rust, but would glisten in the rain and was not prohibitively expensive. He had never used titanium before. It's typically used in much smaller applications that exploit its strengths, like airplane parts, golf clubs, tennis rackets. However, a sudden drop in price allowed the architect to obtain a large quantity of the material. The titanium used for the museum's exterior is not much thicker than several sheets of paper stacked together. And yet these thin metal sheets are actually more stable than stone, which erodes in pollution. They are also relatively flexible, which was critical for the molding of the sheets into the sweeping curves called for by Gehry's design. The thinness of the metal allows it to flutter and quiver in strong winds, reinforcing the sail-like effect of the museum's exterior, while the museum structure of the building underneath, together with layers of insulation, keeps the gallery space inside, which we'll see shortly, peaceful and calm. The Guggenheim Museum was the first Gehry building to fully utilize the computer program called Computer-Aided Three-Dimensional Interactive Application, without which the sweeping organic forms would not have been possible. And in order to avoid overwhelming, it's interesting how you have to think of everything. In order to avoid overwhelming the smaller, older surrounding buildings without relinquishing either size or grandeur, the museum is actually set slightly below city level. Unlike other museums where visitors must climb to lofty sites high above their surroundings, At the Guggenheim, Bilbao, visitors descend a flight of stairs to reach the main entrance. And as the visitors approach, the stairs gradually narrow until visitors reach the limestone and glass entrance and step into the expansive, light-filled atrium, towering 160 feet tall and filled with vertical, curved, and twisted forms. The space has been compared to a luminous cathedral, and it forms the centerpiece of the museum's interior. So we can go to those and see the inside, so you get a sense of what the inside looks like and the beautiful space that he created. There are 20 galleries of varying sizes and configurations and arranged in 3 levels around the atrium. And there's a network of walkway stairs, glass elevators connecting the galleries. 10 of these galleries actually follow a conventional rectangular gallery plan and are intended for display of more traditional art. The remaining galleries deviate from the conventional gallery style. Once completed, the museum's effect was almost immediate. During the first 3 years of operation, the Guggenheim Museum was visited by almost 4 million people, many of them tourists. Within a year of its completion, the money spent by museum visitors on hotels, restaurants, shops, and transportation generated enough revenue in taxes to more than offset the cost of the building. This complete turnaround created a worldwide demand for what has come to be known as the Bilbao effect and led to an increased awareness of the potential power of architecture to change the fate of a city. The museum not only raised Gehry's profile, it also catalyzed the city's cultural and economic rebirth. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the next building, if you will, Mark. Okay, so Bill and I were really lucky to actually visit this building. We went out in 2010 to my stepson's wedding out in California, and I did some research, and I knew that an exhibition that I had just coordinated, Arshil Gorky, was at MoMA or at MoCA, and then I said, okay, we'll go visit the Disney Concert Hall. And it was really an amazing experience, because just like I'm going to read to you and the way people describe it, you actually can step, when you're on different levels, you can step outside and you really feel like you are on the ship with almost like ribbons kind of waving in the breeze. It's a really spectacular building, and the inside is really quite lovely too. So let's get on to this. After the triumph of the Guggenheim, he worked even harder in the US and around the world. So he did many buildings all over the world. And then he came back to California, and he started working on the Disney Concert Hall. It actually had been in the works since 1987, when Lillian Disney, widow of Walt Disney, decided to build a new hall to house the Los Angeles Philharmonic. The following year, Gehry won the competition to design the hall, which was surprising at the time, since he was still known in California as the weird architect who used chain link fencing. When faced with his modern, spiraling designs, the 90-year-old Lillian Disney was perplexed. Gehry actually won her over. We're going to look at this in a few minutes. Gehry actually won her over by showing her the inspiration for his design, a single white rose floating in a bowl of water. Okay, so work on the concert hall went on in fits and starts, stalled over the years by earthquakes, riots, lack of funding. In '97, Lillian Disney died, and many thought that her dream had died with her. But that same year, the Guggenheim opened, and Gehry's instant star status infused new life into the proposal. Funding came through, and 15 years after he began, he unveiled the finished hall in October of '03. And as I say, the structure looks like a cascade of shining metal ribbon unfurled against the sky, which, when you are there, it's really quite true. For the interior, which you'll see shortly, for the interior, he used Douglas fir, to create comfortable, cozy surroundings for the concert goers, who were also treated to floral patterned cushion seats. And they allowed, when you do take your tour, they allowed visitors to sit there. So Bill and I actually went into the hall and sat there for a little while. It's quite lovely. The seat design is a tribute to Lillian Disney. In addition, since functionality is so central, Gehry wanted the musicians to be happy. He worked closely with a Japanese acoustics company to ensure that his design would provide a perfect, harmonious setting. One day, while the orchestra was practicing, Gehry was in the audience. One of the bass players looked at me, he recounted in an interview, and gave me the thumbs up. That's when I knew it was okay. So now I'm just going to give you a little more of the background. Okay, so with the concert hall, Gehry's personal goal as an architect and music lover was to build a building that expressed the joy of both music and in its aesthetics and its acoustics. The sweeping curves and arcs of the structure's exterior evoke a sense of movement and flow reminiscent of music. Though Gehry initially resisted constructing the exterior of steel because of its industrial associations, the potential for glare during the day and its overly dark appearance at night, budget constraints limited his options for materials and led him to seek an innovative solution. And that was achieved when Nippon Steel, a Japanese firm, developed a method for wire brushing each panel of steel in multiple directions to achieve a luster that eliminated the glare but stayed luminous at night. And we have a picture of it at night too, Mark, right? Next. Right, okay. So it stayed, as you can see, it's kind of very luminous at night. These wire brush panels were then laser cut and shaped in LA before installation on the building's exterior. The resulting effect is a building that both stands out from its surroundings and reflects them, thereby creating an impression that is simultaneously singular and harmonious. And the exterior and the lobby of the concert hall are very expansive. He wanted the concert space to have a feeling of intimacy and focus. As I said earlier, acoustics were the priority, but the hall also had to harmonize with his exterior and evoke the same feelings of movement and musicality. And let's go on to I think that's the next one, right? Where we have the interior. Okay, so now you can see the interior. A lot of us growing up, all through our childhoods, if we grew up in Philly, we were kind of used to like the darkness of the Academy of Music. And this is just the opposite. After touring top tier concert halls and consulting with countless musicians, he worked with a Japanese acoustical consultant to shape the whole sound through its spatial design and the materials used. While the acoustics demanded that the hall be a box shape, he found a way to incorporate the billowing curves of the building's exterior into its walls and ceilings. And you can kind of see, as you look at the interior, you can kind of see how things kind of curve around. It's just very, very beautiful. Okay, let's see. Okay, using scaled down models and new technology, he and his team determined how much direct and reflected sound would reach each seat in the hall. These details worked together to ensure that every audience member at every performance had access to the best sound quality and sight lines. This has made music accessible to concert hall attendees of all ticket levels, and the concert hall itself a beacon of the joys of music for all of LA. And I know when I was young, and probably for you, many of you guys too, who'd go to the Academy of Music and you couldn't afford really expensive tickets, and you would sit up in the nosebleed seats. Sometimes you got behind like a pole or whatever, you couldn't see anything. He thought of everything. Okay, so Mark, go back to the rows. Okay, so this is how Frank Gehry won Lillian Disney over. Okay, and this you will see in what they call the Blue Ribbon Garden, right? That surrounds the concert hall. Okay, so it says against the backdrop of the concert hall's otherworldly steel facade, visitors pose in front of a fountain shaped from fragments of royal Delft blue porcelain. What has become a shared public art stop for concertgoers and LA tourists alike started as a personal connection between just two people, Frank Gehry and Lillian Disney. And kind of interesting little story. Disney had pledged $50 million towards constructing the new concert venue, and Gehry visited her in her home to talk about his plans. And on that visit, he noticed a china cabinet that was full of imitation Delft vases that looked out of place in her beautiful home. And when he asked her about the knockoffs, she explained that she and her husband, she and Walt Disney, had a tradition of buying the imitations from airport souvenir shops during their many travels. And she loved to show them to friends to see if they could spot the fakes. So Gehry decided, well, he was asked to create a tribute to Lillian Disney, and he combined her love of Delft porcelain with her favorite flower into a fountain entitled A Rose for Lily. And what he did, which sounds really amazing, he called, okay, let me just tell you how this is very large too. Okay, so it measures 22 feet wide, 17 feet long. And he said he called Delft, the Delft people in Holland, and he told them that he wanted 200 vases, okay, on their timeline. And they told him that he would have to wait about 10 years to get 200 vases. But he had a team assembled to do this, and they worked really, really hard. And the team was able to actually get this done. So it didn't take 10 years. They were able to get this done on their timeline. What the team did, they shaped rebar to form the skeleton of the rose petals. They attached steel mesh onto the rebar. They packed reinforced concrete onto the mesh, applied mortar, and then, and this was a little heartbreaking at first when you hear this, they broke 200 Delft porcelain vases and more than 10,000 tiles to create 250,000 mosaic fragments. And there you see a rose for Lily. So that is the flower. Okay, so now we're going to get to the last building we're going to talk about regarding Frank Gehry, which is our beloved Philadelphia Museum of Art. And as someone said earlier, it was, I know I visited it with a friend, a former guide also. When I came up last summer, I said, well, I have to go see this. And it was kind of daunting, because here we were used to all these kind of, galleries, small, large, whatever. And you often felt, even when I would do a tour, I would have to really chart my way because depending on how things were laid out, you could get lost, even in the old museum. So what this has done, it's really opened up the museum and given it so much more space, which I'll get into the numbers in a moment. And again, people were a little leery when they heard that Anne Darnacourt had contracted Frank Gehry's firm to do this, because again, many people thought of the building he's known for, but he really tried to keep the integrity of the exterior and give the museum the space and the light that it needed. But of course, you can't please everyone, and many people love it, many people don't. But it's always that way with just about anything. So about 90,000 square feet have been carved out of what used to be staff office space, and the vaulted corridor running underground for 640 feet, which was unused for years, probably 50 years. And as I said, I believe it was last May, they unveiled this. And it's actually given museum officials precisely what they wanted: clarity, light, and space, because that was so lacking in our museum. Again, he had become known for his, the museum in Spain, the Guggenheim Bilbao, with its shimmering shapes. But he also had a varied career that included designing shopping malls and office buildings. And only a few months before Bilbao opened, he had transformed the Norton Simon Museum into a serene ensemble of classically arranged galleries. And it was that project project that convinced Philadelphia's former museum director, Ann Darnacourt, that he was the right architect to untangle the muddled interior. The Gehry that the museum hired back in '06 was Gehry, the respectful classicist, because he, as you know, even if you haven't been in, you know he has not changed the exterior at all. Okay, so what he did to maintain the building's aesthetic cohesion, he brought in truckloads of kind of like this light coffee color, this latte color hued Cassoda stone, cutting it from the quarry that had supplied the museum a century ago. And while his details are more streamlined and modern than his predecessors, his love of swooping curves has been kept in check. Okay, but again, as I said, the museum staff are very, very, very happy with the way it looks. Also, something else that was in dire need, as most of you know, were things like the restrooms and the mechanical and the electrical systems. They were really ancient and bottom line ready to fall down. So the ability to take a great building and make it even better is a much underrated art. Gehry's improvements put the building in top form as it enters its second century. New mechanical and electrical systems, and Mark, we can show some more of the pictures that, yeah, okay, so everybody can see. New mechanical and electrical systems have been installed throughout the museum, along with a multitude of elevators. It's hoping that with fewer obstructions, visitors will be able to find their way from, let's say, the Cezanne bathers to the Peel staircase group without getting lost. The museum is now fully accessible on the north and west entrances. And with the addition of several modern restrooms, the days of lining up to get into the 3-stall ladies' room on the first floor are thankfully over. And Timothy Rubb, who is our current director, who will be leaving shortly, they have not replaced him yet, but the journalist who wrote this says, "It says a lot. When I toured the building last week with the museum's current director, Timothy Rubb, the first thing he showed me was the new mechanical room, the snaking ventilation pipes, which may be the most curvaceous of sculptural forms in the whole project, consumed a big chunk of the construction budget." And Rubb said, "It's admirable that the museum spent its money so practically." Okay, so just a little bit about the American galleries. I don't know if anybody's been there, but they are really opened up. And when you do, if you haven't already been, when you do get to the American galleries, they're really going to go back more in history. You're going to see things about Native Americans, a lot more about enslaved Africans. So it's just going to be a lot more cohesive as far as the story of American art goes, because before that, there really was not room to do that. Okay, so it says, and I'll end up by saying, it says, while Gehry and the museum made the right choice in putting restraint first everywhere else, some people don't agree. That this particular author feels that even a venerable institution needs an occasional jolt of fresh creativity. But again, that's up to each of us to decide. So that ends Frank Gehry. And
so I was thinking if anybody had any questions about Frank Gehry, we can take a couple questions now before we move on to the next artist. And so if you have a question, just unmute yourself and jump in.
I have a question, Lois. Besides hello, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
The auditorium at the Disney concert hall. Do you have any information on the kind of wood? You mentioned the lightness compared to the Academy's darkness, and I think
I can actually, I can find a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff online about it, so I can find that out for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Lois, yeah. I have a question. Okay, you were showing that Dancing House of Prague.
Yeah.
It seems like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I mean, it seems so unstable. But
I know, but it's stable. It's been up for quite a while now. no problems.
Lois,
Yeah.
we did see it when we were in Prague.
Did you see it?
Yes,
You're
we did.
lucky you.
Yeah, we did.
So are the floors flat inside the building, or?
I know the windows from the pictures that I saw and the way they described it. Yeah, the floors are flat, but you know, he did a lot of interesting thing with the shapes and the curves of the windows. You know, it's not your typical just, you know, a window in a flat, you know, straight wall. But the floors,
Yeah,
as
I'd
far
like
as
to go inside that building one day, and it seems so.
yeah, Corinne, were you in it? Corinne, did you go inside?
No, we weren't in it. We were just outside it. We saw it at night with the lights and all that stuff.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, like the pictures, okay. Yeah, no, I'd love to maybe someday get back there and actually go in. It looks really
Yeah,
great.
it's sort of scary on the outside, but yeah.
I know, but it's fun. And again, you know, this was totally new. No one had ever done anything like this before. So,
And then on the Philadelphia Museum of Art, are they still doing the reconstruction of the stairs? Is that still?
oh, this is a work, the whole museum is still a work in progress.
Okay.
I know one article I read said, you know, probably be at least another maybe 10 years before everything that they would like to do gets done. Hopefully they will have the funding for it. They even talked about putting like windows underneath, you know, as we call them, the rocky steps, you know,
Yeah,
actually, but I don't know, you know, if that will win out or not, because, you know, there are a lot of people who have to be consulted, but yeah, there's going to be a lot going on in the next several years at the museum. So it'll be interesting to see. Yeah. Okay, so shall we move on?
Yes.
Okay. All
So
right.
people,
So
you can
I
say-
actually found the next artist. I had never heard of her, but I found Nirit Levav-Packer, her work. I found it last year, maybe around this time. A friend and I had not been down to Atlantic Avenue in Delray Beach. And Atlantic Avenue is a long shopping street, you know, great tourist mecca where there's all kinds of shops and restaurants and galleries. And of course, I love going into art galleries. So I saw this art gallery.
Oops.
And
I'm sorry.
Wait.
When
okay, yeah, we're not ready for that yet. Okay, so I wandered in. I actually saw a piece of sculpture in the window, and I said to my friend, "Let's go in." You know, I was going to go in anyway, but I really wanted to check out this particular piece of sculpture. And this actually is an Israeli-owned art gallery as well. And so I went in, and I learned about the sculptor. And in a few minutes, you're actually going to see a very interesting video about how she does her works. And I actually bought a small piece of her sculpture. And it was fortunate because the owner, I don't know if it was the owner or the wife of the owner, but someone that actually, you know, that I spoke with there when I bought it, they said, yeah, they're having trouble. Again, you know, everything goes back to the supply chain and the cost. So they're not going to be able to bring any more of her work into the gallery because of the prohibitive price of actually shipping it over here. So I have a new addition to my family, and you will see that at the end. But okay, so let me just tell you about her, about Nirit Levav-Packer. She was born in 1963. She's married, has 4 boys, and in 1987, she graduated from the Parsons School of Design in New York, which after she developed a fashion design career, and she focused on making wedding gowns. But in the year 2000, she began to create art in parallel to her other occupation and extended her knowledge in goldsmith art, ceramics, and iron sculpture. Nirit acquired most of her training as an artist at a stage decoration workshop that belonged to her father, Tzvi Levav. And he was considered a leader in his field. She used to help her father on holidays, where she learned from him how to weld and work with various materials. And most of all, not to hesitate to try, experiment, and learn. The rest of her knowledge was brought by her mother, who's an arts and crafts teacher and a seamstress. The diverse materials that she was exposed to, and the arts that she was exposed to since her early childhood until her young adult life, made a great impact on her today, and also on her love for recycling. And you'll see why when you watch the video. She calls herself a compulsive collector of junk, a variety of materials that she collects out of curiosity and interest. And once there is enough of it, she begins to create with it. The early series bring out Nirit's ability to create art from a variety of recycled materials, mostly metal, such as gears, bearings, railroad ties, keys, old nails, waste such as bulbs, mattresses, dolls, clothes bags, glass shards, and material from nature, such as acorns, sunflower seeds, rice, sea sand, gravel, seashells, just to name a few. In 2010, she made a choice to focus on one material, bicycle chains, and one subject, dogs. The material was discovered by coincidence during one of her visits at a bike repair shop. She asked the owner to save his garbage, as she said, for her. The chains appeared to be a wonderful material that contained both her love of iron and her excitement to get to know and investigate its delicateness and flexibility of this material and its versatile movement. The result was the first dog series called How Wow. Later on, she began to create the Dresses series that is made of different materials, such as tree branches, watches, bands, bicycle parts, bulbs, keys, gravel, construction iron, and added in humor matching dogs. In 2015, she began working on another series of pregnant women, all made of different parts of cars, motorbikes, and bicycles, clothes hangers, springs, and more. She believes that all the people of the world have a talent that is unique to them, and if we focus on our inner selves and bring out the best we can, we will live in peace with ourselves and influence our near and far environment. To her, art is a cross-borders language that is not based on academic studies. Rather, to her, when you look at an art piece or design, it makes no difference what's the nationality of its creator, or his sex or skin color, where he studied or showcased his works before. It only matters if the piece touched the observers, if it moved them, and if it speaks a universal language that unites hearts. So that's a short bio on Nirit. And now, Mark, let's turn on the video, please.
הרבה שנים העדפתי להתחבא. אני אוהבת לעבוד לבד, בשקט, אני אוהבת את הקצב שלי, אני אוהבת את השקט. זה סוג של מדיטציה בשבילי, העבודה והיצירה והאומנות. היצירה שלי באה מהבטן. אני מחפשת מה שיעניין אותי. יש לי איזה רעב ליצירה שהוא כל הזמן מתחדש. אני אספנית כפייתית, בעיקר של ג'אנק. לא יודעת אם זה בדיוק ג'אנק, אבל בשביל אחרים זה ג'אנק. בשבילי זה משהו שמוצא חן בעיניי ואני מחליטה לאסוף אותו. זה יכול לקחת שנים. ברגע שיש מספיק מהחומר הזה, אני יושבת איתו, אני מקדישה זמן, אני מתחילה לשחק איתו, אני נוגעת בו, אני עורמת אותו, אני חותכת אותו, אני פותחת, אני מדביקה, אני עושה כל מיני סוגים של ניסיונות, ותוך כדי המשחק הזה עם החומר, פתאום התמונה מתבהרת לי בראש מה אני רוצה לעשות. זה כאילו פתאום ברגע אחד זה נוחת. ואז אני מתחילה. אני יודעת איך זה מתחיל, אבל אני לא יודעת בדיוק איך זה יסתיים. יש לי איזה כיוון מסוים, רעיון, מחשבה, ואני מתחילה כמו לצייר באוויר עם החומר, וכל הזמן אני בדיאלוג איתו. ברגע שאני שלמה עם היצירה, אז מבחינתי היא מוכנה. גדלתי באווירה וגם במערכת ערכית של חבל לזרוק. מהצד של אימא שלי שגדלים בבית עם הרבה ילדים, אז כל דבר חבל לזרוק, אפשר לעשות ממנו משהו אחר, אפשר להעביר אותו, אפשר לעשות ממנו ריבה, אפשר להקפיא. ומהצד של אבא שלי, שהוא היה בעצם תפורן, היה עושה תפורות לסרטים ולהצגות, והיה לו בית מלאכה ענק עם המון המון חומרים, כי בתפורה זה בעצם לא משנה מאיזה חומר זה, משנה איך זה נראה בסוף. הייתה לי קריירה של הרבה שנים של עיצוב אופנה ושמלות קלה בעיקר. ניהלתי עסק עם חנויות ומוכרות ותופרות ולקוחות. באיזשהו שלב בחיים פתאום קלטתי שאני לא נהנית יותר, שמשהו לא טוב לי מבפנים. בעצם ההבנה הזאת היא שאני רוצה לקום בבוקר וליהנות ממה שאני עושה, ואני כבר לא יכולה יותר עם היצירה שהיא מוגבלת רק לבד ורק לצבע לבן.
אז החלטתי לצאת למסע של חיפוש עצמי, של לימוד והתנסות, של טכניקות וחומרים חדשים, כמו צורפות, אובניים, פיסול. פשוט העמקתי את מרחב היצירה שלי, עד שהרגשתי בשלה לשינוי.
כאומנית הבנתי שאני צריכה להתחיל לדבר בסדרות, כל נושא להרחיב אותו, והסדרה הראשונה בעצם שעשיתי, הסדרה של הכלבים מחלקים של אופניים. זה עץ שהוא, אני קוראת לזה קן לתינוק, שזה כמו קן של ציפורים יוצא, עץ בהיריון. החלטתי לעשות סדרה של נשים בהיריון, כי הריון מעניין אותי גם פיזית וגם נפשית. זו בעצם מהות ההבדל בעיניי בין גברים ונשים. האישה היא זאת שעוברת את הקושי של הריון ולידה. מעבר לזה, עניין אותי גם להשתמש בחומרים הקשים והחזקים כמו ברזלים וחלקים של מנועים, ולנסות ליצור נשים שהן רכות ועדינות. החומר מגלה בפניי כל מיני צורות ואפשרויות שאני יכולה לעשות עוד דברים. אז אני אומרת לו, אוקיי, לאט לאט, נגיע גם לזה, רק צריך קצת זמן. חייבת לגעת. יש חומרים שאני לא עומדת בהם. אפילו במוזיאונים לפעמים שאף אחד לא שם לב, אני מתקרבת ונוגעת, חייבת לדעת מה זה החומר הזה. אפילו שאני יודעת שאסור. אני לא עומדת בזה. בדיאלוג הזה ובמורכבות הפנימית שיש לי בין הרצון להיחשף שקיים, לבין הנטייה שלי להסתתר ולהתחבא, גם לעבודות יש מה להגיד, והן כן רוצות שיראו אותם. אני מקווה שהיצירה שלי תרגש, תשמח ותיגע באנשים.
Okay, Mark, so we can go show some of the images. Okay, so I mentioned earlier about the dog series, and that's actually what I saw when I was at the gallery in Delray, that they only had only two, and very simple in comparison to this. But I thought this was great because you really get to see what she does with the bicycle chain. Okay, let's go to the next one. And there you see some more. Those of you who are dog lovers probably know exactly what they are as far as their breed. So again, you can really see the detail and the workmanship. I think that video really portrayed it really, really clearly. Okay, and let's move to the next one. Okay, so here we have some bulldogs, which are also great. I love what she did with their ears and their little bow around their collars. really wonderful. Okay, let's go. And isn't that an adorable picture? I thought that was just so cute to have a real dog next to her dog. Okay, and then I think we're on to, okay, so that's my purchase. It's standing in my house right now. So that is my new pet, my French poodle. So that concludes my presentation. I hope you guys have enjoyed it and maybe, want to kind of read more about it. Okay, here we go. Thanks for attending.
Okay, so does anybody have any questions? No.
Okay.
Outstanding, Lois. It's really good.
I'm going to enjoy it. I enjoy doing it. And what I'll do is Mark, I'll send you, I'll look up more about the woods that were used in the concert hall itself. And I'll send you what I find, and I don't know, whatever, if you want to put it in or just have it, so anybody who wants to see it, at the temple can pick it up.
When my boys were growing up, I was struck by what she was talking about in the video, how she just collects all kinds of random stuff.
Yeah.
My boys were growing up, we had this big Rubbermaid container that we called Beautiful Junk. And all kinds of random stuff would just get in there. And then when the boys were doing some kind of crazy project, they would dive in there and, put this with that and create all kinds of things. And that's what we called it, Beautiful Junk. And they made projects with it when they were little boys.
Lois, I just, your presentation was great. Thank you very much.
I'm glad
Yes,
you enjoyed
fascinating.
it. You're quite welcome.
Thank you.
Good. Well, I wanted to bring some artists that maybe, most people don't know much about. And I knew nothing about, Nirit. I had never heard of her until my walk into that gallery last year.
Yeah.
And I just thought she was fascinating once I started researching her. Yeah.
And Frank Gehry, I've heard the name, but boy, wow. It's
Right.
amazing.
Yeah, I know. He's an amazing guy, and he's still going strong at 93. Yeah.
Fantastic.
He's amazing.
I love how that video gave like a little look into the artistic mind and the artistic way of thinking.
Right. Well, that's why I wanted to show it, because just talking about it, this really, showed exactly what she's, what she's all about.
Yeah, she had that bin full of keys. She said, when I get enough of something, I sit with it, I talk to it, and something happens in her mind and her hands. And
Right. Or how they showed her cutting down the branches, and then she made that pregnant woman out of the branches. Wow, it's
fascinating.
amazing. Yeah.
Fascinating. Wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Oh, you're very welcome. I really enjoyed doing it. Glad to share it.
Thank you. And I saw you on the slide, it said any more topics. So people kind of think about that, and we'll see what else maybe we could ask Lois to teach us about.
Jewish artists part too.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Look forward to. Thanks so much.
And good seeing everyone.
That too. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you, Lois.
Good night.
Thanks, Lois.
Quite
Look forward to
welcome.
seeing you in the spring.
Yes, I will be there. Hopefully, maybe in person, even if it ever happens again.
It will.
Yeah.
It has
I know.
been.
I
We
know,
have
I
been
know.
meeting in person, small groups, and
Right. I know.
we're hoping to get it all together, right, Mark?
Yes. I'm gonna stop the recording.